Donald Trump is considering to impose yet another 100 billion tariffs on yet another 100 billion worth of Chinese imports, and the Chinese Ministry of Commerce has said all options are on the table in China's response. Just how strong is China's response? And Iran has reacted angrily to an interview given by Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, in which he said that Israelis are entitled to live peacefully on their own land. What's behind the about turn in this Saudi position? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. President Donald Trump on Thursday directed U.S. trade officials to identify tariffs on yet another $100 billion worth of Chinese imports in light of what he called China's unfair retaliation against earlier U.S. trade actions, which included proposed tariffs on some $50 billion worth of Chinese goods. This latest action fuels an already heated trade dispute between the world's two biggest economies. U.S. stock index futures fell immediately. Financial markets have actually already swung wildly over the past few days over fears of a trade war between Washington and Beijing. So how much closer to an all-out trade war does this latest action bring the two countries? And what could China respond to President Trump's latest announcement? With me in the studio are John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and Einar Tangen, a current affairs commentator. And actually just moments ago, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs held a press conference, and its spokesperson gave China's response to President Trump's announcement. Let's take a listen.
Just now, I mentioned China has been fully prepared. If the US side announces the list for the added $100 billion tariff, we will immediately fight back, and we will take any measures to fight back.
So very strong wording there. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. First of all, how do you read into the messages that were sent out by the spokesperson of the Ministry of Commerce? Einar, have you heard anything like that from the Chinese side ever?
Never, actually. The resolve that has been put for this is similar to that of Taiwan. I mean, there is no going back. I don't think people understand. Too often they see China's pronouncements as, you know, very calm and saying, everybody, let's calm down, let's be rational, let's call for restraint. This is really saying that there is no retreat, that there is no way that we're going to be bullied into the negotiating room and then be flogged by Donald Trump over issues that can be resolved through negotiation, but not through threats.
John?
Yeah, this is very, very concerning to me, especially for the fact that the spokesman mentioned that there's actually no negotiation going on right now at this moment, even though, you know, if you look at the U.S. economic advisor quoted a statement as if there was negotiation going on. He said that eventually these tariffs will never be applied and all that. So it turns out that so far there's no negotiation going on at all. So that really concerns me. And the language itself reminds me of the language put into a statement during, before the Korean War. I think the Washington side needs to really read into what's behind these lines. Chinese language itself in a statement is very carefully worded. So, you know, this is really, really dangerous to me.
Right.
But, behind this, you should be very clear to see that this is not China versus the United States. What this is China and the rest of the world, the existing international order, versus an individual who doesn't believe in it. He doesn't believe in climate change or the Paris Accord. He doesn't believe in the WTO. He doesn't believe in anything except being a playground bully, asking everyone for their lunch money.
Why does China have so much problem with the 301 investigation? Understand it?
I mean, first off, you're going back to pre-WTO. So everyone who joins the WTO, the U.S. encourages China. There's all these negotiations, and now they're going back to laws that were created in 1962 and 1974. I mean, this is unheard of. I mean, yes, the laws are on the books, but no one thought that anybody would actually use that at this time, since the world order has changed.
Yeah, I went through this document, 250-some document myself. You know, the document itself touches upon the very fabrics of China's economy. It mentions, for example, the industrial policy being a big problem. It mentions the fact that SOE phenomenon is a big problem. These are the things that simply not negotiable. I mean, it touches upon the very fabric of our economy, so-called what we call the socialist economy with Chinese characteristics. These are the things simply not subject to negotiation, subject to change. And also, you know, the way these things are presented, you know, the U.S. has already said that they're not going to take a legalistic approach to this. It doesn't say, none of these things they mention in the report violates any of the GATT agreements here. China knows that, U.S. also knows that. What they are saying is that it violates the spirit of the WTO agreements. It violates the spirit of a free market and free trade. But who is up to, you know, who is in a position to judge that?
They're being their own referee while being a player at the same time.
You have to go to the, you know, multilateral system, to go to WTO to go through these things.
And I think one of the things, sorry, Einar, one of the things that I particularly picked up is that basically they're calling the lies that are being sent by the Trump administration, because President Trump said that he is a good friend with President Xi, that all of this is going to settle by negotiation, and Cutler also said that some kind of negotiation is going on, and the spokesperson of the Ministry of Commerce said there's no such thing going on. There is no consultation, and what is even more important, he says, under the current circumstances, it is not possible for China to negotiate. Why not?
I think, as I said, it touches upon the things that are very fundamental to our economy.
What would be the precondition for China to agree to sit down and negotiate?
Well, I think China is willing to reduce those trade deficit problems from a U.S. perspective, but for the things that are mentioned in the 301 report, it's not something up to negotiation, and also it's not going to be addressed very quickly. You know, this is going to be a phased approach, maybe to address these issues over time. But you know, just to put these things on the table, I mean, I think from China's perspective, we sense that this is coming towards China very deliberately for another agenda here.
Right, and also with a serious attitude problem.
Right, exactly. That's another thing. Right.
To answer your question, what they've said is that they want all of these unilateral tariffs withdrawn, and then there can be negotiations. But there will be no sitting down at the point of gun, an economic gun.
No. And China also said, okay, we are considering very seriously all kinds of possible responses, and new comprehensive measures could be taken. And at the end of the press conference, before leaving, the spokesperson also said all options are within China's consideration. What kind of options is he talking about?
Well, this really concerns me. I think the implied message here is that it would probably include options going well beyond just economic options. You know, we can talk about something else, the political side, the security side. At the end of the day, we know that China's imports of American products and services would be something like, you know, a little bit over $200 billion. So you're quickly running out of these things that you can impose tariffs on. But there are other things on the table as well. For example, you know, you've mentioned the foreign exchange. It can be something can be leveraged off China's holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds and bills, and also keep in mind that corporate America's operation in China amounts to something between $300 billion to $500 billion. That's a huge business. If it's not more important, I mean, it's a pure profit business, other than just the trade flow itself. So if it comes to the end of the day, you know, this is something can be targeted to, and which is something which nobody wants, I guess, right?
Right. China will suffer very badly as a result of these measures. But do you think China is willing to run that risk to sink the boat with both China and the U.S. on
Well,
this?
the board is in their court right now. I mean, it's up to them to decide. I still want to, you know, point out the fact that his direction to the USTR is to consider to impose tariffs here. So it hasn't really gone to that stage yet. So we'll wait and see, you know, whether it's bluff or whether it's actually...
But it doesn't matter if it's bluff at this point. The Chinese government has drawn a red line, and they said, as long as you have these unilateral threats at us, we will not sit down at the table. If you want to sit at the table, you must withdraw them. And instead of doing that, Trump is, throwing it out more. Now, the question comes up, is he trying to divert attention from his problems domestically? His lawsuits by the women, his investigations by Mueller, or the chaos within his own White House?
Yeah, that's not within China's consideration.
It isn't, but the problem is he may be, it looks to me like he's playing domestic politics issues at the expense of international
Well,
politics.
that's the worst form of politics. That's the worst form of politics. Using political issue for to sacrifice national interests.
This is
crazy.
This is what Trump has introduced. He mixes security and economics at the whim of a hat.
China says that the United States will be shooting itself in the foot if they really roll out such a list. Is that the kind of thing that China is talking about? I mean, you might gain a little bit, but in the end, you will be hurt a lot. And China also says that the United States has seriously misjudged the situation. What does that mean?
I think my interpretation is that I think the Chinese side is saying that U.S. is underestimating China's confidence and resolve to fight back and not backing off. This is something really, really important to our national interest. China also mentioned the statement is that China is doing this as a battle between multilateralism against unilateralism. It's not just China against the U.S. It'll be a whole bunch of countries, including countries like U.S. allies, Canada, Japan, South Korea, and European allies will be subject to his bullying if China backs off from this. So I think this is something that China has no way to back off.
Look, this is, and I completely agree, this is the same as if a playground bully started going up to everybody there and say, give me your lunch money, and if you don't, I'm going to give you an economic beating. And if anybody who's watching this thinks for one instant that China will be the last if they're successful, absolutely wrong. He will use the exact same tactics on every other country in the world.
Yesterday I was talking to a financial market analyst, and he says the markets, the markets reacted, but or corrected, or went back.
Right.
Yeah. So if this really goes in, do you think it will be really real money being lost instead of just headlines being
Well,
estimated?
I mean, within an hour or so, the stock market is open in New York City, and you're going to see, stocks going to tumble very quickly. And now, all of a sudden, the world knows that what's going on. Previously, we don't know that there's actually no negotiation going on. Now we understand that, there's nothing going on right now. It's all his bluff, talking about these things, and China, both sides are not negotiating. And this is very, very dangerous to me.
How do you think the United States, the Trump administration, is going to react to this? I know.
Well, he learned under Cohn, who was the lawyer who worked for Senator Joe McCarthy, one of the great populist Reds under the bed guys, and he said every time you're attacked, double down. So you can expect Donald Trump to try to play the figure of a big tough guy, and he's going to show China. But the fact is, he's playing with a weak hand. I mean, if they do go to war, what the U.S. public does not understand is exactly what you said. There's $500 billion worth of business that will be lost in China itself. And that is what is on the table here.
However, if you listen to the mainstream media in the United States, you don't hear this kind of message, right? People are saying Trump says there's no trade war with China, or China is doing the wrong thing, and Trump's support rate is going up. What's the danger in that they're not getting the serious message coming from China in the mainstream?
Well, I think the classic case of why war breaks out is because of miscommunication. It's underestimation of the other side's resolve. And in this case, I think China can't afford to even entirely write off the U.S. sound of U.S. trade. I mean, this is something like 10% of China's GDP. I don't think U.S. can afford doing this. There's political baggage over there across the Pacific, and it would be disastrous for the U.S. economy, of course for China economy as well, and also involve other countries for the world economy. This is it's a carnage going to be.
And also, looking further, 50 years later, when we look at this debate that's going on today, Einar, what kind of historic significance do you think this is having?
Well, I'm going to agree with you that if you start looking before the First World War, the Second World War, you had instances where you had powers rising in the face of existing powers, and there was tremendous miscommunication, a lot of bluffing going on, a lot of assumptions being made. I think China is trying to cut through that today by issuing the strongest language I've heard them ever make on any kind of economic policy. They've drawn a red line and they made it clear.
Basically, China wants to be given the right to develop itself.
No.
Right.
I guess that is...
Well, that's non-negotiable.
That's non-negotiable. Many thanks to my two guests, John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics, and Einar Tangen, our current affairs commentator. And here is my point. Really, during my 20 years in Chinese TV, I can barely recall the last time that China was so strong in its position on an international issue. The spokesman of China's Ministry of Commerce made it more than clear that the Trump administration is making the wrong bet, thinking China will back down under its pressure. China is prepared with concrete plans for any further escalation. All options of response are within China's consideration, and China will walk the talk. The spokesman also clarified that no consultation has happened between the U.S. and China about the 301 section investigation, and it is impossible for China to negotiate with the U.S. under the 301 framework. Practically, China is sending out a stern warning of the possible consequences should any further unilateral action be taken by the Trump administration. Some people might think it is only a battle of narratives and that China is only bluffing, but one must remember President Trump is the one who has a record of contradicting himself. The Chinese leadership means what it says, otherwise it loses credibility in front of everybody. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has said it would be an unforgivable mistake to negotiate with Israel just days after Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said for the first time publicly that Israelis are entitled to live peacefully on their own land. The Crown Prince also recently authorized direct Air India flights between New Delhi and Tel Aviv via Saudi airspace. All flights over the kingdom bound for Israel having previously been banned. So what is behind this apparent U-turn on the part of the Saudis toward their traditional long-time enemies? And what will be the political fallout across the Middle East? Joining me, Professor Daniel Serwer from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, and here in the studio, Ms. He Wenping, a Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome to both of you. Professor Serwer, both Israel and Saudi Arabia hold a common view on Iran and its rise to power within the region. Both have a common ally in the U.S., but behind it all, is this any more than just a case of my enemy's enemy is my friend?
Well, it's definitely that, and I think it's an important realignment. I think the Sunni Arab countries are less concerned than once they were with the Palestinian issue. They're much more concerned than once they were with Iran. And the result, I think, is an important realignment that puts Israel and Saudi Arabia on the same wavelength, at least on the main security issue they both think they face. Mm-hmm. But the Palestinian issue does remain open, and I don't think it can be overcome easily.
Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia not only is not formally recognizing Israel, and Riyadh has long maintained that normalizing ties with Israel hinges on an Israeli withdrawal from Arab lands captured in the 1967 war. Professor He, is Saudi Arabia softening its stance on this particular point?
Oh yes, absolutely. Even though it hasn't mentioned clearly about this withdrawal from the 1963 to 1967 border, but I think implied we can smell this kind of change because, like my colleagues just mentioned, during the past years we can see the Saudi and Israel, particularly when the Trump administration sworn in the White House, and then they find they got a very strong supporter, that is the United States under the President Trump's leadership, and then so they are thinking the Iran issue now becoming the the fundamental threat to both of them. So they found a common enemy. That's why they now put aside those past mistrust between them. So my point is, even though the Saudi hasn't made it clear a change of their policy on this 1967 border issue, but but implied they have already made some change already.
Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said this week that movement toward negotiation with the cheating, lying and oppressive regime of Israel is a big, unforgivable mistake that will push back the victory of the people of Palestine. He also pledged to continue backing the Palestinian group Hamas. Professor Serwer, is this simply about supporting the Palestinians, or is it more about a push for domination of the region by Iran?
I think it's much more about the whole region and Iran's effort to take a stance that it hopes will give it support from even from Sunni Muslims throughout the region. I doubt that that will actually happen, but it's quite clear that Iran is going to stick with Hamas, it's going to stick with Hezbollah, it's going to continue to support these non-state actors that are heavily armed now. I should have added the Houthis, and that perturb the Sunni world. And that gives Israel and the Sunni world even more reason to get closer together.
Professor He, can you remind us what exactly it is that makes Saudi Arabia and Iran such bitter enemies? Is it simply that they represent the leadership of the two main factions of Islam, Sunni and Shia, or is there something much deeper than this?
Well, I think both. First, of course, is they have different religions. One is a Muslim country, another is like a Jewish country. So, now
we're talking about Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Yeah, Iran and Saudi Arabia, they are different in religion as well. So, but this is not only reason, of course. Now they have been intertwined with a lot of geopolitical concern, and also with this recent, we see there are different camps right now in the Middle East. So in terms of those different wars, one is in Yemen, another is in Syria. So nowadays, Iran is back with like Houthi in Yemen, and also like with Syria government Bashar, but Saudi totally on the opposite way. So they are now just a confrontation with each other in the different fighting front. So this makes them now fit into the deeper conflict with each other.
Many might argue that the Saudi-sponsored Arab Peace Initiative, a regional peace plan which dates back some 16 years ago, offered a full peace to Israel, providing a variety of issues being resolved. For instance, the return to the pre-1967 ceasefire lines, just a resolution of the refugee problem, and a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. So, Professor Serwer, do the Crown Prince's comments raise the likelihood of a peace deal becoming a possibility?
I don't think so. Not with Prime Minister Netanyahu still in power. He shows very little interest in returning to anything like the 1967 lines. He's delighted with President Trump's move of the American embassy to Jerusalem, in fact to a place that isn't exactly in East Jerusalem but is pretty close. And I just think that there's no hope with Netanyahu in power, and frankly I don't think there's much hope with Trump and Mahmoud Abbas in power either. I think the Arab Peace Initiative was a good initiative. It's a shame that it has not been implemented. But I think we're going to have to wait a change in leadership before it is.
Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, recently visited both Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now, the U.S. administration is also keen to see, at least on the surface, an Israeli-Palestinian talks resumption for relations between Israel and Arab nations to improve. So, Professor He, what is the role of the United States here now?
Yeah, the United States always want to play a very fundamental role between Israel and the Palestinian side, and but with the recent this decision made by the Trump saying they are now recognized Jerusalem as the Israel's capital. So with this very bold move, now those Arabic words, particularly the Palestinian side, has made very clear, saying the United States no longer enjoy this authority, being the negotiator for, bringing the Palestine and Israel together. So I think now U.S., even though they just, tied themselves with Saudi, now also like Israel, back Israel very much, but it's not so legitimate anymore to bring these two together.
Professor Serwer, how could the new Saudi position affect Israel? Some have said that the moves by the Saudis and Israel are likely to bring greater strength to the Arab world, supported and armed by the U.S. in an effort to fight off Iranian supremacy. Is that being overly simplistic?
No, I think that's right. The Arab world is strengthened by this. Israel offers a lot of help to the Arab world in security terms. And the Arab world, if it stops being an enemy of Israel, obviously will enhance Israel's security. So there is some real overlap of interests here. But I agree entirely that the Americans, with this move of the embassy to Jerusalem, have delegitimized their traditional strong role in the negotiating process, and I just don't think we can hope for much out of that process in the near future. There's not going to be a deal of the century.
The Saudis have frequently played down news of closer ties with Israel, and concerns of a backlash from the Arab world continue to leave talks almost clandestine in nature. Professor He, how much support can Saudi Arabia expect from other Sunni states in the region with regards to its new Israeli policy?
Well, I'm not so optimistic about this kind of support can be offered to Saudi because Saudi now using its money, they have dollar diplomacy. They can still together hanging around with like some countries, including the Egypt and other countries, Emirates, like that. But if they are continue like to be with very tough this stance and with Iran, and then continue together with Israel, because Israel in the past long history of time, it has been regarded as the common enemy for all those Arabic worlds, especially now, just a few weeks ago, they will have a big celebration for Israel's 70 years anniversary for their nation building, and the Trump administration even want to give a big bonus to this celebration, that is moving the embassy all the way to the Jerusalem. So that will, I think, put some salt on those scars on those Arabic countries, and particularly to the Palestinian people. So that will further make this Saudi find it's quite difficult to get more allies in Arab world.
We have to leave it there. Many thanks to my two guests, Professor Daniel Serwer from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, joining us from Washington, and Professor He Wenping, a Senior Research Fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. We've got The Point.